In today's video, we're exploring post-war America, a period marked by triumph, transition, and tension. As World War II ended in 1945, the United States emerged not only victorious, but stronger than ever before. However, this moment of global dominance came with new responsibilities and new rivalries. The seeds of the Cold War were already being planted before the last bombs fell. Join me as we look at how the United States transitioned from wartime to peacetime and how diplomacy and disagreement set the stage for the second half of the 20th century. Let's get started. When Japan surrendered in the summer of 1945, the most destructive conflict in human history came to a close. World War II had left much of the world in ruins, but the United States stood tall, its homeland largely untouched by the devastation that leveled cities across Europe and Asia. With the unconditional surrenders of both Germany and Japan, the United States found itself in a unique and powerful position. It was now the world's greatest military power, wielding unmatched influence and, for a time, an exclusive monopoly on nuclear weapons. This dominance gave the United States both the opportunity and the responsibility to help shape a new world order. America was not only victorious, it was confident. It had helped end fascism abroad, and now it was prepared to preserve peace and democracy around the globe. But the road ahead would not be easy. Even before the war officially ended, cracks in the alliance between the United States and the Soviet Union were already appearing. In January of 1943, President Franklin Roosevelt and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill met in Casablanca to coordinate Allied strategy. Soviet leader Joseph Stalin was not present, and already his key demand for an immediate second front in Western Europe was something Roosevelt and Churchill couldn't grant. Instead, they pledged to fight until the Axis powers surrendered unconditionally. Importantly, they reassured Stalin that there would be no separate peace with Nazi Germany, ensuring the Soviets wouldn't be left to fight alone. Later that year, in November of 1943, the Allied leaders gathered in Tehran, Iran, for their first direct meeting with Stalin. By this time, the tide of the war had turned. Germany's advance into the Soviet Union had been stopped, and now Soviet troops were pushing westward on their own. This shift meant that Stalin no longer needed American aid in quite the same way, and Roosevelt's bargaining power was diminished. Still, some agreements were reached. Stalin promised to enter the war against Japan once the conflict in Europe ended, and Roosevelt pledged that the long awaited Second Front would be launched within 6 months. But beneath the surface, disagreements lingered, especially over the future of Poland. Roosevelt and Churchill supported the Polish government in exile based in London. Stalin, however, backed a rival communist regime based in Lublin, within Soviet controlled territory. Despite the diplomatic niceties, this issue remained unresolved and would come to symbolize deeper divisions to come. By February of 1945, Allied forces were closing in on victory in Europe, and the leaders of the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union convened once again, this time in the Soviet city of Yalta. At Yalta, the Allies in effect redrew the map of Europe. Soviet troops were already occupying much of Eastern Europe, and Stalin insisted on maintaining a buffer zone of friendly governments between the USSR and Western Europe. With the Red Army already in place, the Western Allies reluctantly agreed to grant Stalin influence over Eastern Europe, trusting his promise to hold free and unfettered elections after the war. In hindsight, this decision would prove fatal. Barely 3 weeks after the Yalta Conference, Soviet tanks rolled into Romania. Rather than honoring the promise of free elections, Stalin began establishing pro Soviet satellite governments across Eastern Europe. This expansionism and the failure to allow political freedom in these regions marked the real beginning of the Cold War. The symbolic term Iron Curtain, coined by Winston Churchill in 1946, captured the stark divide that now separated East from West, communist from capitalist, dictatorship from democracy. Despite their alliance during the war, it was now clear that the United States and the Soviet Union had fundamentally different visions for the post war world. The final meeting between the Allied leaders came in July of 1945 at Potsdam, Germany. Much had changed since Yalta. President Roosevelt had died in April, and Vice President Harry S. Truman now represented the United States. The Nazi threat was all but eliminated, and the urgency that once united the Allies had faded. At Potsdam, the leaders attempted to finalize agreements made at Yalta, including how to manage defeated Germany and how to handle post war settlements. They also reconfirmed that the Soviet Union would soon enter the war against Japan, a promise that would be fulfilled in August, just before Japan's surrender. However, tensions at Potsdam ran high. With the shared enemy gone, the ideological rift between the United States and the Soviet Union became more visible. The cooperation that had won World War II was giving way to suspicion, competition, and hostility. The end of World War II marked the beginning of a new American era, one of power and global leadership. Yet it also ushered in decades of geopolitical struggle. While the United States celebrated its victory and took steps to build a new world order, it also found itself locked in a fierce and complex rivalry with the Soviet Union. The Cold War had begun, shaped by wartime diplomacy, post war ambition, and a profound clash of ideologies. The world had survived one devastating conflict only to find itself on the brink of another, this time fought not with tanks and planes, but with influence, espionage, and the threat of nuclear weapons. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you next time.